Fable 3 took players 50 years into Albion's future, aiming to deliver the same freedom its predecessors promised. But with Lionhead Studios now under Microsoft's control, the team was forced to rush the game's development, finishing it in just 2 years. This led to significant cuts and compromises. Combined with Peter Molyneux's fixation on power and accessibility, the magic of Fable began to fade, ultimately bringing down Lionhead Studios with it. This is a tale of grand ambitions, corporate pressure, and the downfall of one of the greatest RPG franchises. Fable 2 became a massive success, quickly becoming the best-selling RPG on the Xbox. Within just 90 days, it sold over 700,000 copies, and by 2010, that number had soared to over 3 million. Naturally, this made Microsoft a lot of money and left them eager for more. They immediately turned to Lionhead Studios with a clear demand: we want a third Fable game. By this time, Lionhead were now fully integrated and owned by Microsoft. While this could be seen as a good thing, with basically unlimited money at their disposal, being owned by such a corporation came with certain demands, like not being late on development, as Lionhead have notoriously been on Fable 1 and 2. Their creative process just wasn't built around strict deadlines. Instead, they thrived on iteration, crafting the game, playing it, revising it, and repeating the cycle. This approach, while producing unique and beloved games, made it nearly impossible to predict when a project would be finished. This demand from Microsoft would be one of the main obstacles Lionhead would struggle to overcome, as the deadline was 18 months, the quickest Lionhead would ever have to finish a game. To keep on the tradition of drastically changing Fable from its previous releases, Molyneux was keen on pushing Fable 3 further from its original concept, making Fable 3 more of an action-adventure game and less of an RPG. This was all to make the game more exciting. We're actually changing Fable 3. We're moving more towards the action-adventure, and we're diminishing a little bit of RPG. We still love RPGs, we still adore RPGs, but we also love the drama and the excitement that action-adventure games bring. But this decision also had another reason: to continue his obsession to reach a bigger audience. It's really about not getting rid of every element of an RPG, but certainly making it something that people who aren't interested in that side of things will still enjoy. The other issue, while Fable had been enjoyed by many players over the years, Molyneux began to worry that the franchise would begin to become a bit generic. If all the rules have been established and all you offer is a new story and a handful of locations, people will start to lose interest. So Molyneux and Lionhead worked up ideas on what would make Fable 3 not just an evolution, but a revolution. Lionhead Studios had always been in search of the perfect combat system for Fable, believing they had found it with Fable 2's one-button combat. However, in typical Lionhead fashion, they felt the need to tweak it again for Fable 3. This included the ability to have the one button now act as a combination of the other two buttons, since now in Fable 3, players would be able to use melee and ranged weapons at the same time. Of course, the weapons could morph based on the player's morality and playstyle, but there needed to be more, and Molyneux believed that he had the answer. The problem is, the cores say, what reward do I get for doing combat well? My answer is, the weapons will now level themselves up. This grand idea from Molyneux came from his belief that Fable had really always been about power, and allowing players to craft weapons to level up would give players the power he believed they needed. The original idea the team had was just going to be a blacksmithing minigame, or an ability to find augmentations to add to weapons. But this didn't quite work. The big idea came when the team thought of the idea of the weapon being a reflection of how a player would fight. So, as you're fighting, your sword will start to physically change. For instance, the curvature of the blade is now dictated by how many times you performed a specific action in battle. The notches in the blade represent how many times you've died using it, and the brightness of the glow of the sword indicates how many innocent or evil people you've killed. So, as you're doing this, as you're crafting your sword, you're unlocking abilities too. There are a lot of finishing and special moves that can be unlocked. On top of the weapon leveling system, the magic system was also overhauled in Fable 3. With the ability to spell weave together different types of spells using gauntlets. You can wear these two gauntlets at the same time. The first one is a force gauntlet and allows you to push things away for you with your left hand. On the right hand here, we'll put on a fireball gauntlet, so that now when you cast a spell, you get a combination of pushing and fire. Now, while Lionhead was always trying to change the game mechanics to freshen up Fable, one thing that never really changed was the art style. And with Microsoft fully backing Lionhead, Fable 3 gave them the opportunity to really shine. Lionhead had access to a much larger budget now. The amount of love and budget we got for audio just helped create that immersion. But it's not just that, it's everything. It's the art, it's the music. It was just awesome to see that all of these things got the same amount of love and attention to detail. Nothing felt like an afterthought. This larger budget was also a dream come true for Kate Saxon, the lead voice director, who was asked who would be her dream signings for every character in Fable 3. They asked, just in your wildest imagination, who would it be if you could afford for these roles? And I said, absolutely. Michael Fassbender for Logan, no questions. Stephen Fry for Reaver, John Cleese for Jasper, Simon Pegg for Ben Finn, and Naomi Harris for Paige. To her surprise, Lionhead hired them all and added Bernard Hill, Nicholas Hoult, and Ben Kingsley, much to the surprise of Saxon, who never believed Lionhead would hire all of them. While Fable 3 had many stars doing the voice acting, some of the dev team actually was able to voice some of the characters, the Hobbs. The voice of the Hobbs is done by Dean Carter and myself, says Backer. We got recorded doing these weird sound effects, all of that stuff. Then Russell Shaw, head of the Sound of Music, combined all of them together. When it came to sound design, the team went above and beyond to get the perfect audio for Fable 3. And while the previous game was described as being superhero and bashy, the new mantra for Fable 3 was to bring light, magical, and airy sounds. This was specifically to make it a more delicate sound for Fable 3, so that when players played long hours, it would not fatigue the ears. But the most complex task for the audio team was the combat and weapon sounds. Each weapon needed to have its own personality, so the team spent a lot of time in experimentation to figure out the best way to do this. They worked with organic and otherworld-like elements, with different frequencies and textures, to give each weapon its own identity. Back when Fable 1 was being developed, Molyneux responded to an interviewer about making the greatest role-playing game of all time, and this single idea had always plagued Molyneux with the Fable franchise. I'll say, look, why are we doing this garbage, man? We're not doing this to make the 4th or 5th best role-playing game of all time. We need to make the first. Molyneux hated just mildly improving and refining past mechanics or gameplay, something that could easily be seen from Fable 1 and 2. With Fable 1, there were a few things that were short of the mark. And with Fable 2, I'd give the breadcrumb trail high 8s and 9s. Maybe I'd give some of the iterative cutscenes a 3 or a 4. And we could just concentrate on Fable 3 and just polishing these, and maybe then, it'd be the greatest game of all time. Take the expression system for example. From Fable 1 to Fable 2, it was slightly upgraded with more expressions and the introduction of the wheel selector. But in Fable 3, Lionhead felt the need to reimagine this system with the new dynamic touch and expression touch systems. So now, to form relationships with people, the player must use a random order of expressions until the NPC asks for the player to do a relationship quest. With the touch system, Molyneux was heavily inspired by the game Eco, where players were able to reach out to the girl and lead her by the hand, which to Molyneux leaned into his belief of giving players more power in Fable. Players would now be able to shake hands with people, walk and hold hands, and even drag people around the environment. You can grab someone, really grab them and drag them, or hold their hand. When you're passing judgment on someone as a king, you can literally grab them and throw them in the dungeon. And because you can do that to someone, with them kicking and fighting against you, it just seems a lot more emotional than just pressing B. Incorporating touch wasn't the end of Fable 3's unique gameplay elements either. Molyneux wanted to take it further. I want dressing rooms where I can change my clothes, I want armor, where can I craft my weapons, I want war rooms, where can I strategize? This led to the idea of the Sanctuary, Molyneux's crazy idea of a 3D menu system. This 3D menu consisted of 4 main rooms players could walk around in: the armory, dressing room, treasure room, and the live room. Players could at any time pause the game, be teleported here, and quickly change their attire, weapons, check their stats, and attributes. Molyneux was especially happy with the living map, where players could zoom into the towns and see the people of the community, and players could also buy houses straight from the map. The Sanctuary was also home to John Cleese's butler character, a character Molyneux was especially fond of, as he hated being told what to do in video games, especially when it came to quest, as he explained to I Eat Games. For me, when a game is nagging at me to do something in particular, all I want to do is something else, and I just hate it. Now, if you go to the Sanctuary, there is a John Cleese character, and he's the butler in the game. He's there to help you be the best you can possibly be, so every once in a while he'll prompt you on occasions when the AI thinks you're really not doing anything, but he doesn't pester you. But the biggest decision for Fable 3 was to overhaul the entire leveling system. The game was about more than combat. Fable was about expression, getting married, and well, doing almost anything else besides combat. So why weren't these rewarding players with experience as well? The big idea to change the entire leveling system in Fable 3 came when someone said the word followers, because what people think of you means more than anything. Everything you do in the game, including what you wear, including the way you fight, including touch and expressions, can gain and lose you followers. So, for example, if I marry someone in the game and that was the daughter of someone significant, say the mayor of the town, I get more followers. The more followers I have, the more powerful I am. This revelation paved the way for the Road to Rule mechanic, another 3D environment that contained 10 gates, with chests where players could spend their guild seals that contain new aspects of gameplay, like spells, expressions, and combat upgrades. And of course the hero weapon customizations. This Road to Rule mechanic was integral to what Molyneux and Lionhead wanted to do with Fable 3 overall, allow players to become the rulers of Albion. Power, as stated many times before, was the core pillar of Fable 3. Any way Molyneux could make players feel more powerful, he was going to do it. This included changing up how the hero's journey was written, as it didn't make sense for him anymore. It breaks down into 3 areas. One is the story. How can I write a story that makes you feel powerful? Well, most stories are the same whether they're books or films or TV. And certainly that was true. Fable was about the hero's journey. You know it's there. You start off as a weak character and then there's some big baddie, and then you power yourself up for the ultimate fight and you defeat the big baddie. Credits roll. The abrupt ending after becoming powerful was not something Molyneux liked. So with Fable 3, the goal was to expand the hero's journey. And instead of ending the game after you become more powerful, Molyneux wanted this to be the midpoint, and then playing the rest of the game as a powerful being, in Fable 3's case, a monarch. While Fable 1 was inspired by folklore and Fable 2 was King Arthur and Robin Hood, Lionhead took inspiration for Fable 3 from monarchs and rebels. This is why the Road to Rule and Followers idea became so integral. Players were going to be able to rule over Albion after they overthrew their sibling with a revolution. Besides just gaining followers for more influence and power, when players go to sway these followers, players will have to choose between what's right and what's possible when they inevitably become ruler. This prompted the creation of another new gameplay feature, judgments. When the player successfully leads the rebellion and becomes ruler, they now have to take the responsibility of answering to all the promises they made with their newfound power. The issue is, the players might not have all the resources needed to actually help them, as there's an impending darkness coming to the kingdom in a year's time, and the players will need over 6 million gold to protect the people. This means when you go to actually fulfill your promises, you might not have all the resources you need to do it. And in typical Fable fashion, you can either be a good ruler or an evil ruler, while being a good ruler made it much harder to fill the treasury. Fable 3 offered many judgments for players to decide upon, ranging from raising or lowering taxes, creating schools, guard budgets, and renovating Bowerstone, as Molyneux explained to IGN. The beauty of this mechanic and the judgment mechanic is that it enables you as a player to get involved in whatever you'd like to get involved in. So whether you're passing judgment on a small case about a loaf of bread, or whether it's a big case about the community going under military rule, you can decide, no, I'm going to go out there as king and sort it all out. But sadly, this mechanic and much of the game itself would never come to fulfill its full vision and potential. During the middle of its development, it was becoming quite clear to some of the team that Fable 3 was not going to make its scheduled release date. This did come to a shock to most of the team, as they expected the development to be much easier than Fable 2, since the tools to build the game were already created, and thus most of the groundwork was already done. Who it wasn't a shock to was Dean Carter, who had heard rumblings of impending doom ahead. This, coupled with the fact that Fable had gone on way too long for him, ultimately led him to leave Lionhead before Fable 3 was completed. I'd had enough of working with teams, and other forces were conspiring to make the design of the game painful. From what I heard about what it was like at Lionhead after I left, I was very glad I was no longer working there. Dean would go on to create his own studio, Another Place Productions, with his brother Simon joining after Fable 3 was complete. The rumblings that Dean Carter began to hear around the studio were true. The final months of Fable 3's development were terrible. This was in part for the fact that Peter Molyneux wasn't there for most of the development at all. He left the team on their own, only returning towards the end, when he wanted to add multiple new gameplay elements. One of these was to integrate Kinect features 6 months before the game shipped. The plan was to have mini games like a statue puzzle, where players would have to stand in front of the camera and strike a random pose, or a more ambitious idea where players could create their own expressions within a Bowerstone shop. The biggest gameplay element Molyneux wanted added was the Road to Rule feature, which needed 6 months of development time, but instead it got 3 weeks. This was because this was 5 months before launch, and Fable 3 had no leveling feature at this time. And Molyneux essentially bribed a programmer to do it in 3 weeks if he wanted to go to E3. He said to me, "Production have told me that if we want Road to Rule, we can only get that if we have 6 months of dev time." He said, "If you can do it in 3 weeks, you can go to E3. But you are the one who makes the decision as whether you get on the plane or not." And because Tim really wanted to go to E3, he slept at his desk and finished it in 2 weeks. Peter gave me a carrot and I took it with open arms, and I had an amazing time at E3. With time running out on Lionhead, they had two options: extreme crunch or cut content. With the nightmares from Fable 1 still in their minds, it wasn't a hard choice. Fable 3 was brutal. We gave them hope, we gave them opportunity, and then we just crushed them. The biggest cuts affected the game's main selling point, ruling Albion, reducing it to a few basic choices and awkward time skips, as Molyneux explained to TheGamer. It was never supposed to be like that. What we wanted to do is give the players the feeling that they could be whatever king they wanted, and there would be consequences for all your actions just like in Fable 1 and 2. It was supposed to be the first third of the game was your claim to power, and then the next 2/3 of the game was all about the exploration of power and responsibility. For this failure, Molyneux only blamed himself. As on previous titles, he would often fight for his team in the time they needed to get more polish on the games. But this time, he just didn't do that. He knew the game needed another 18 months. I hate the fact that we had all this potential and we didn't do what we should have done. Instead, it needs another 1.5 years. It needed double the time, basically. But while the game was only 1/3 of its size, Lionhead still got a pat on the back from Microsoft for finishing the game on time. Fable 3 would release on October 29, 2010, selling roughly 4 million copies. The game received generally positive reviews for its humor, world building, and combat, but saw complaints about a host of technical issues, bugs, and the pacing of the story. Gamers were much more vocal in their displeasure with the game for not enjoying the speaking protagonist, simplified magic system, and the lackluster road to rule gameplay. While the cuts to the game obviously made Fable 3 a shell of what it was supposed to be, there were other issues that made it even worse. One of the most significant was its departure from the franchise's fantasy roots. The series originally centered around heroes in a magical world. It lost its essence with each sequel, culminating in Fable 3's setting during the Industrial Revolution, a period far removed from the enchanted landscapes fans grew to love. Mark Hill, the game's lead writer, explained that the focus moved to a more human-centered story, where industry, politics, and survival overshadowed the magic and mythology that once defined Albion. This transformation was evident in Bowerstone, now an industrial hub filled with factories, smoke, and a bustling port, a stark contrast to its previous charm. Evidently, Fable 3 was supposed to have an entire story element about how the Industrial Revolution was destroying the magic within Albion, with the player getting a chance to fight to bring the old world back after they become ruler, but none of that ever made it into the final game. On top of this, there was the issue of Lionhead streamlining or stripping away more of the RPG elements to make Fable 3 even more accessible for a new audience. This was backed up when Molyneux got research back from Fable 2 that more than half of the players playing the game understood and only used half of the features within the game. One example of this was the expressions. Molyneux thought that they were cool in Fable 2, but they were nothing more than a fart joke, and they needed an overhaul for Fable 3. The way you overhaul them is to make them simpler so that more people can use them. Striving for simplicity and accessibility is giving true depth. You want 100% of the people to understand 100% of the game. Lead designer Josh Atkins remembers being told that a blind child should be able to win the game with their feet, a lofty ambition to aspire to, but one that more than likely would alienate a fanbase. But Molyneux wasn't afraid of doing such things, like making the game simpler or removing health bars and experience, because he believed those numbers of people who want such things in games were dwindling. At the end of the day, Lionhead and Molyneux believed in their choices for Fable 3. It was just the time frame didn't allow them to get everything where it should have been. For instance, the idea of leveling outside the GUI was supposed to provide tough choices for the players. Which chest should one take? But this feeling of that was never realized. The process, the way that we designed, meant that the game came together very late. This left the team with so little time to balance and refine the game. That meant that what could have been a great mechanic turned out to be a good idea. Lionhead even believed their quest story and sound design, despite the cuts and the short time frame, were better than Fable 2, and that the game overall was only guilty of being too small, as it wasn't the big step up that players believed it was going to be. Lead combat designer Mike West even said the game was more polished than Fable 1 and 2, and that everything in the game all fit together well, and the final product was very good. He even continued to say that Oblivion was not as fun as Fable 3. Every time you finish playing Fable, you have a smile on your face. Every time you play Oblivion, you'll say, "I enjoyed my time there. Now I want to go play something fun." Fable 3 would essentially be the end of the original Lionhead team. Dean Carter had already left, and his brother Simon followed shortly after the launch. He wasn't the only one, as George Backer would join them, wanting to do his own thing. I just felt like it was such a good run, but at some point, you just have to go and do your own thing. Fable 3 proved to be the first major failure for Lionhead, but the one that was too much to come back from. There are plenty of questions about Lionhead though. Would Fable 3 have actually been better with more time? Would anyone care for a Fable 4 if it did succeed? And could Fable ever recapture that magic from Fable 1 that captivated so many people all those years ago? Sadly, we might never know. But what we do know is that for a time, it changed the way we saw games. It gave us a glimpse of what it meant to live in a world where our choices shaped our destiny, where every corner of Albion held a story waiting to be told. And for that, Fable will always be remembered as a game that, at its best, was pure magic. While Fable 3 was Lionhead's first failure as a studio, it wasn't the reason Lionhead shut down. That story is much more complicated. Lionhead had always been about creativity and pushing boundaries, so much so that even while developing Fable 3, or even Fable 2 for that matter, the team would constantly hold meetings about what to do next, always looking into the future. Nothing more defined this than Milo and Kate, a controller-based turn-connect game where players played as an imaginary friend for a boy whose parents constantly argued. Many believe that this game was based on Molyneux's childhood and was a project he took very seriously. With the Kinect supposedly being the next big thing, with fine motor control and precision never seen in a game and accessory, Microsoft allowed Molyneux to create a demo for E3 2009. After a prototype Molyneux showed off made some execs cry, to sell the world on a dream and the future of video games. But from the start of this dream, it would all be sold as a lie. The tech for Milo and Kate was not developed enough, so Molyneux decided to record footage of the game and then use that as an elaborate smoke and mirrors demo for E3. To make sure nobody would notice, the demo was rendered out frame by frame in high definition, with an actress being hired that would pretend to play the game. As a potential warning sign, 2 weeks before E3 and the filming of this fabricated demo, a power outage in the entire town of Guilford hit. Not wanting to waste their effort though, the team flew out to LA a week early, so they could edit their footage and begin rehearsals for the show. While not very exciting, it still did the job of getting people to talk about the game. But not in the way Molyneux had hoped. People believed that they would be sent away to an imaginary world, where the kid's mind could escape the realism of the world he was living, doing fun things like being on a pirate ship. But the game really was just hanging out in the room with the kid, while you could hear the parents arguing outside the room. But the real damage for Milo from the public was something much darker. That the game was inappropriate, a grooming simulator. The demo suggested that Milo was some kind of complex AI who would respond to any voice action or user action, which led to people wondering, would Milo interact with inappropriate requests or actions? This was actually something Molyneux knew could be a concern, but completely ignored because he didn't believe he should be afraid to create a childhood game on the fear of other people's issues. Should we as creators be frightened by people who are sick enough to imagine that sort of thing happening? I don't think we should. Being creative is taking risk. Why shouldn't we tell stories about childhood, about the wonder of childhood and the wonder of learning something, and the wonder of teaching someone, but not in a horribly corrupted way? But the game wasn't as complex as people thought in 2009. It wasn't some all-understanding AI. If someone acted inappropriate, nothing would have happened. The game was programmed to respond to certain things only. It was a scripted narrative. With the weird press for Milo and the confusion of what it was, Microsoft lost patience with the idea, and Molyneux's creation began to fade away. Even when Microsoft told Molyneux to stop development, he would continually show latest versions of the game, hoping he could change their minds. This mixed with Microsoft realizing how much money it would actually take to create a high-end Kinect was the real death for Milo and Molyneux's dream. And if you remember from the Fable 3 story, this is when Molyneux returned to the development of Fable 3, when he bribed a dev to create the Road to Rule mechanic in only a few weeks. With Milo and Kate officially done, the team that had spent years developing it moved to another project, Fable The Journey. This title was also a Kinect game, which was the reason this team was chosen. The Journey was a first-person spellcasting action game, using only the Kinect to cast different types of spells with their dominant hand and manipulate environmental objects and enemies with the push spell of their other hand. During E3 2011, Molyneux was quoted saying, "It's about the experience and the atmosphere with this one. We are trying to make it feel not linear, or as on rails as we can." The only thing was, the game was on rails, and Molyneux's mouth was going to get another team in trouble. With E3 done, the team did attempt to build some levels that weren't on rails, but in the end, it just brought more trouble and frustration. One dev flat out said if Molyneux just admitted the game was on rails in the beginning, like an interactive film, The Journey might have received a better response. But this was Peter Molyneux, and that wasn't his style. One dev remembers towards the end of development that Molyneux wanted to completely change the vision of the game by giving players the ability to soar up towards the heavens and then cast spells from above towards the earth. This would have been impossible as the game was designed as if the player could only look forward, so the devs had only created environments and effects from this perspective. Fable The Journey would be a huge flop when it was released in 2012. Around this time, a lot of things began to work simultaneously, and not in favor of Lionhead. What many people might not know is that during or right after Fable 3's launch, Molyneux had the core Fable team working on a secret Fable project, codenamed Project Opal. This secret game was a village building simulator that had three-way peripheral connection. The PC version would act as a village builder itself. This was noted to be akin to Minecraft, but offered a more intricate building mechanic. The mobile version would be the fishing game and resource builder, while the Xbox version would be the shooter. This indeed was another one of Molyneux's crazy ideas. The actual game itself involved getting resources to build your village up. To get these, you would use the mobile version of the game, which was like Farmville and Cookie Clicker. Molyneux specifically used 3 different devices for this insane idea, because he knew Microsoft were pushing the cloud technology. And if the game sounds crazy, that's because it was. It was described by one dev as if Assassin's Creed met Fable that met Minecraft and SimCity. But the most bizarre thing about Project Opal was, it actually worked. The team was actually able to get everything running together smoothly and seamlessly, and Peter was extremely proud about it. They built a game that could connect millions of people and allow them to experience it together. I felt Lionhead should do the thing it was created to do, and that is make a game that never existed before, especially after Milo and Kate was canned. That was in Lionhead's DNA, and that's what Project Opal was. Okay, if we're gonna do something new, let's do something really new. Sadly though, Project Opal would never see the light of day. After Project Opal went into the shadows, Microsoft decided to force games as a service in 2012, threatening to shut down Lionhead if they would not comply. Microsoft saw no future for any single-player focused RPGs anymore. It was for this reason that John McCormack's Fable 4 idea was rejected. Keeping the theme of moving into the future, he wanted to use the Unreal Engine and move the series into the technological industrial age, with tram cars and flying machines. McCormack would turn Bowerstone into London huge and dense, with Jack the Ripper running the streets, as a Wolverine in disguise, even throwing in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, really leaning into British mythology. And that was going to be Fable 4. It would have been darker and grittier, and because it was R-rated, it would have the prostitutes and the humor. I was like, man, this is going to be brilliant, and everybody was really into it. Everyone except the Microsoft execs, who refused it because it wasn't a game as service, and they didn't believe Lionhead could double the player count with a new RPG. But McCormack believed that they could. I said, look, just give us 4 years, proper finance. Give us the chance Mass Effect has, Skyrim has. They're getting 4 years and a lot of budget. Give us that and we'll give you something that'll get you your players. Nah, you've had 3 shots and you've only tripled the money. It's not good enough. That's what I was annoyed about. In early 2012, Lionhead suffered what was dubbed Black Monday. Disappointed by the direction the company was heading and the projects that were being worked on, John McCormack, Stuart White, and a handful of other Lionhead veterans all quit on the same day. Molyneux did not react well. He yelled at every single person leaving and basically kicked them out, without any of their stuff. In classic Lionhead fashion, the ones that left headed to the pub to get one final hangout together. But Molyneux didn't make it easy. He called them all back to the studio for a meeting where he was very petty. Peter went, "We're gonna call this Black Monday." John McCormack, "Stand up," and he's like, "Slow clap." It was really horrible. He took things personally, I can't blame him. All the leads had essentially gone, "Screw you." But Molyneux did realize his behavior and ended up fixing the situation with his team, especially with McCormack. He just gave me this really proper emotional, inspirational talk about entrepreneurship and what I've got to do. He was generally amazing. He was generally apologetic. With Lionhead staff dwindling not long after Black Monday, Peter Molyneux left the company he co-founded. The exact reasons he left were never really known. Some speculate it was a mix of him thinking he could make a fortune in the free-to-play social game market, and the fact that Molyneux became sick of only making Fable games, never being able to use his creativity since 2005, with Black and White 2 and the movies. While there were many other devs that have left, losing Molyneux was the nail in the coffin on keeping Lionhead, well, Lionhead. It was the end of an era. While the studio was unsurprisingly more organized, more structured, and professional after Molyneux left, many didn't realize the creativity he inspired at the studio, and more importantly, his ability to keep Microsoft at bay. Peter could do what he wanted, and he could say no to Microsoft about almost anything. He had that power, and when he left, we suddenly felt a bit more vulnerable. And Lionhead was left vulnerable. They were forced to make a live service game, and that game was Fable Legends. Now, nobody knows for sure where the Fable Legends idea came from. There are multiple stories about its creation. It was either Project Opal morphed into Legends, with executives wanting to tie in the Fable name, as they weren't sure Opal would work without Fable connected, and some say it was an entirely new pitch as a Fable Team Fortress. At any rate, this new Lionhead 2.0 had to make some drastic changes to their studio, with Legends now the focus. Namely, the skill set of its staff. Many people with the background in monetization, back-end service, and competitive game design were hired to help Lionhead transition into this new era. Namely, John Needham, who worked on the Champions Online and Star Trek MMOs at Cryptic, who became the head of studio, and Dave Eckleberry, who is a mobile game consultant, became the creative director. Lionhead 2.0 now believed they were in position to succeed with Legends, but this was far from the truth. Lionhead immensely struggled creating Fable Legends. The devs' main struggle was balance. Never had made a competitive game before, they had no idea how to balance this new 4v1 game. The pitch for Legends was 4 heroes who battled monsters sent by the villain, with a leveling system to make players stronger. The issue was how to balance all these elements together. The camera was also a huge issue. All Fable Legends levels had to be built left to right, because the villain's camera would move from left to right, as the heroes progressed from one area to the next. They also never agreed that the game should be a constant struggle or an easygoing fun experience. There was also Unreal Engine issues, griefing issues, bug issues, you name it, Legends had it. It was an absolute nightmare. The development 2 years in was still so bad that Lionhead hired a professional multiplayer expert to come to the studio and analyze Fable Legends' design and balance issues, and offer their advice on how to clean up their design. Luckily for them, they were able to name a host of corrections to make Legends better. But all the advice was never taken seriously by Microsoft, and nothing was done. While Lionhead had their obvious issues making Legends, Microsoft definitely played a pivotal role in its failure as well. This was because Legends ended up being used as a poster child for all of Microsoft's new tech initiatives, like revealing they wanted to make Legends a Windows 10 game, as well as an Xbox game, because Microsoft wanted to do cross-platform play, or the fact that Legends should have been cheap to produce, since it was a free-to-play game, but Microsoft ended up spending roughly $75 million on it. This was because they wanted Legends to be bigger and more polished than any game out there. Legends consisted of 16 levels in an area named Bright Lodge, which devs say all had custom beautiful work of art by environmental artists and cost huge amounts of money. There was apparently enough content for a boxed game, and it looked good enough to rival any game out there. And without Molyneux there to defend them though, Lionhead went along with all these demands because they believed it gave their studio more security for the future, if they kept meeting Microsoft's lofty demands. Lionhead kept working on the game for another 2 years, missing the initial release date of 2015. With no end in sight for a finished product, Microsoft ultimately made the decision to cancel the project completely. And while shocked Microsoft actually canceled Legends, as Lionhead believed Microsoft put way too much money and time into it to cancel the whole project, the devs were happy about it. See, Lionhead's 2.0 ultimate goal was to take all of the assets from Fable Legends and create Fable 4. They knew nobody really wanted Fable Legends. They barely wanted to work on it themselves. But there was really good work done within the game that could become something special that players wanted. That was Lionhead 2.0's dream, making a prequel game that was filled with magic and cameos from characters everyone loved. But they would never get that chance because on the same day as canceling Legends, Microsoft announced the closure of Lionhead itself. There were plenty of rumors as to why Microsoft made this decision. Some believe Lionhead's failure to push back Microsoft's game as a service model, as they were stuck for 6 years making Legends with no success, led to their downfall. Some believe it was purely a business decision to save some money from bad decisions, after spending $75 million on practically nothing. And some believe Lionhead was wrongly shut down, because Microsoft had such a bad year with games that they were targeted, and a bigger studio such as 343 should have been the one shut down instead. But for whatever the reason, Lionhead was finally shut down after 19 years. But that didn't stop some of the employees from trying to save all their hard work. According to UK employment law, Lionhead had to be left in a consultation period, which meant while technically closed, the doors remained opened. Most of the employees did stay home, but there were a few who attempted Project Phoenix, and like the name implied, bring Legends back from the ashes. Their goal was to finish the game and ship it as a brand new studio with licensing rights from Microsoft. They actually came close to 2 different deals with Chinese companies looking to form a new studio, but they never actually committed. But with the team out of ideas now, the last thing people saw of Legends was a developer streaming the game to Twitch through a projector displayed on the wall, completely breaking NDA, crying while the game went offline. The legendary Lionhead was shut down on April 29, 2016, and with it, the Fable franchise, leaving behind a legacy of creativity and the belief that anything was possible, even if nobody believed in you. Dean Carter summed up Lionhead perfectly. I always described Bullfrog and Lionhead as places where you were generally allowed as much rope as you wanted, as long as you were prepared to hang yourself. While Molyneux and the gang are all off doing their own thing now, Molyneux admitted he would still be interested in creating Fable 4. If someone comes up to me and asks, hey, you want to do Fable 4? I'd totally be up for it. I would get Dean back, I would get Simon back, and I would remake this world. It's such a rich world and there are so many avenues we didn't explore. That would be really good fun to do, and I'd still want the equivalent of another dog. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you click on this one next.